There comes a point when forgetting him isn't an act of revenge, it's an act of freedom. When you stop looking back, stop waiting, stop caring, something powerful happens. He finally realizes what he threw away. The moment you move on like he never existed, that's when he remembers you the most. There is a certain kind of silence that speaks louder than any speech you could ever give, and that is the silence of your absence. When you remove yourself completely from someone's life, emotionally, mentally, physically, you create a void that nothing else can fill. Your absence speaks louder than anything you could ever say. When someone has had constant access to you, your kindness, your attention, your effort, they begin to take it for granted. It becomes part of the background noise of their life, something they assume will always be there. But the moment that background disappears, the moment your presence is no longer something they can lean on or expect, they feel the shift immediately. It's only then that the value of what you brought becomes unmistakably clear. Absence removes the illusion. When you were there, he may have convinced himself you needed him more than he needed you. He thought your messages, your efforts, your presence were simply reflective of your personality rather than your choice. People forget that showing up for someone is always a decision, not a duty. But when you walk away, when you stop showing up, stop engaging, stop trying to fix what he kept breaking, he is forced to confront something he never considered, that you were choosing him every day and now you're not. That realization hits harder than any conversation you could ever attempt to have. Your absence is powerful because it leaves him with only one thing: his own thoughts. When you're no longer there to explain yourself, to defend yourself, to respond, to comfort, or to give him the emotional reassurance he used to feed on, all he has is the silence you left behind. And silence is where truth grows. He will replay moments in his mind, trying to understand what changed. He will revisit things you said, things he dismissed, ignored, or undervalued. He will start to see how many times you gave him chances, how many times you extended grace, how many times you tolerated what you shouldn't have. And he will realize that he mistook your patience for permanence. Absence doesn't just highlight what you used to give, it exposes his own shortcomings. When you're no longer around to soften the blow of his actions, he has to face the reality of who he has been. You were the buffer, the balance, the emotional foundation. Without you, the cracks in his own behavior become painfully visible. People often don't recognize their flaws until the one person who held them up is no longer there to catch the consequences. So while he may have felt unaffected when you were around, your disappearance becomes the catalyst for the kind of self-awareness he never expected. The beauty of your absence is that it requires no explanation, no announcement, no grand exit. You don't have to declare that you're done. You don't have to tell him how much he hurt you or how deeply he underestimated you. You simply step back from his world and step into your own. And that quiet, decisive shift becomes the message he can't ignore. It says, I mattered, you lost me, and now you feel it. Your absence also creates contrast. When he sees you pouring into your own life, choosing joy, building peace, and investing in people who value you, he recognizes the difference between what you offered him and what anyone else could ever provide. It's not jealousy that hurts him, it's accuracy. He sees the truth he refused to acknowledge. You were rare. You were consistent. You were genuine, and he dismissed it. In the end, the loudest message you'll ever send is the one he only hears after you're gone. Not because you wanted to teach him a lesson, but because you finally chose yourself. And that is what echoes in his mind long after you've moved on. Emotional detachment is one of the most powerful shifts a person can make, especially after investing deeply in someone who didn't appreciate you. Detaching emotionally is the ultimate power move, captures the moment you stop letting someone else's actions dictate your feelings. It's the moment you no longer react to their silence, their inconsistency, their hot and cold behavior. And when you reach that point, something fundamental changes, not just within you, but in the dynamic between you and him. Because emotional detachment doesn't mean you stop caring overnight. It means you stop wasting care where it isn't reciprocated. At first, emotional detachment can feel unnatural. You were used to giving, trying, reaching out, and fighting for the connection you believed in. You were used to making excuses for him, believing potential over reality, hoping he'd eventually step up. And while all of that effort came from a place of love, it also kept you anchored to someone who wasn't giving you what you deserved. When you start to detach, you begin to see those patterns clearly, the patterns that once kept you stuck. You recognize how much emotional energy you poured into someone who offered you crumbs, and clarity kills attachment faster than anything else. When you finally see the truth, you cannot unsee it. Detaching emotionally is powerful because it breaks the cycle he relied on. Many men get comfortable with the idea that they can give just enough to keep you around, but not enough to truly commit. They depend on your emotional investment to compensate for their lack of effort. They count on your empathy, your patience, your hope. But when you stop reacting, when you stop waiting for his message, when you stop feeling disappointed by his behavior, you take away the emotional fuel that kept him relevant in your life. Suddenly, the dynamic shifts from him having power to you reclaiming yours. What makes emotional detachment so impactful is that it is silent. You don't announce it, you don't warn him, you don't post metaphors or declare you're done. You simply stop giving him emotional access. You stop justifying his actions. You stop explaining yourself. You stop allowing his inconsistency to affect your mood. He feels the shift without you saying a word. He senses the difference in your energy, in your tone, in your presence, or lack of it. And that shift unsettles him more than any argument ever could. Emotional detachment also frees your mind. When you are attached to someone, especially someone inconsistent, your thoughts revolve around what they are thinking, what they're doing, and whether they still care. But when you detach, you reclaim your mental space. You stop analyzing. You stop replaying conversations. You stop overthinking every detail. You redirect your energy toward yourself, your goals, your growth, your healing. That shift not only helps you move forward, but also highlights how unnecessary the emotional chaos once was. And here's the truth most people don't understand. Men feel emotional detachment far more deeply than they feel anger or confrontation. They're used to women arguing, explaining, or expressing hurt. But when a woman becomes calm, genuinely calm, that's when panic starts to set in. When he sees that his words no longer sway you, that his inconsistency no longer affects you, that his presence no longer excites or unsettles you, he realizes he no longer has emotional influence over you, and that realization is brutal. Your detachment also becomes the mirror he can't escape. He sees what life looks like when you're no longer invested. He notices the absence of your compliments, your effort, your reminders, your presence. He watches you build yourself up without him, and it slowly dawns on him that he was never the reason you were strong. You were the reason you both survived as long as you did. Emotional detachment is not revenge, it's liberation. It's choosing yourself over his potential, and that choice is what makes him finally understand that he never had the control he thought he did. When your heart no longer responds to him, when your peace no longer depends on him, he realizes too late that he lost the one thing he never expected to lose, your emotional availability. And that is the moment he remembers you forever. There is something profoundly powerful about a woman rebuilding her life after someone has taken her for granted. It's not just growth, it's transformation, and that transformation becomes impossible for him to ignore. When you rebuild your life, he sees the woman he took for granted transforming reveals one of the most undeniable truths about human nature. People only recognize your value when they can no longer access it, When you step into a version of yourself that no longer revolves around him, he is forced to confront what he lost. And it hits him much harder than you ever imagine. When you were with him, you gave him the best parts of you. Your loyalty, your softness, your patience, your effort. You showed him care he didn't have to earn, support he didn't appreciate, and presence he never matched. Over time, he became desensitized to the greatness standing right in front of him. That happens when someone gets comfortable with your love. They forget it's rare, they forget it's a privilege, they forget it's a choice. So when you walk away and begin to rebuild your world without him, it forces a contrast he never expected. The rebuilding process is where your power rises. You start healing wounds you never admitted you had. You start prioritizing yourself in ways you once neglected. You set boundaries, pursue goals, reconnect with your passions, pour into friendships, and rediscover your confidence. You shift from surviving him to thriving without him. This kind of glow is not surface level, it's a deep internal reset. And that kind of transformation is impossible to hide. It shows in the way you speak, the way you move, the way you carry yourself. There's a calmness in your energy, a confidence in your steps, a certainty in your choices. You become the woman you always were, finally unburdened by someone who couldn't meet you where you stood. What truly gets to him is the realization that the woman you are becoming now is the woman he always hoped you wouldn't become, because it confirms that you never needed him. While he expected you to stagnate, to miss him, to come crawling back, you instead evolve into someone stronger, wiser, and emotionally unavailable to the version of him he used to be. He sees your progress and understands that you didn't break when he left. You bloomed, and that bloom becomes the price he pays for not valuing you. Your transformation also challenges his ego. Men tend to believe they leave a permanent impression on a woman, that she will always think of them, always wait, always wonder, what if? But when you rebuild, when you glow, when you rise, you shatter this illusion. It becomes clear that he wasn't the reason you stayed strong, you were. And that realization hurts him because it contradicts the narrative he created in his mind. Watching you thrive without him is one of the most humbling experiences he will ever face. As you continue rebuilding, he begins to see the difference between the version of you he abused, ignored, or took for granted, and the version of you emerging now confident, grounded, and whole. He realizes that the love you once gave so freely would be priceless to him now, but he no longer has access to it. That is the moment regret begins, not because you left, but because he now understands exactly what he lost. The woman he once underestimated becomes the woman he cannot forget. Every milestone you reach, every piece of peace you reclaim, every new chapter you step into becomes a reminder of what life could have been if he had treated you better. Your transformation becomes his regret, your growth becomes his consequence, and your healing becomes the very reason he remembers you long after you've stopped remembering him. There is a certain kind of peace that doesn't look dramatic or loud. It looks calm, grounded, and unbothered. But that calmness is exactly what shakes someone to their core when they lose access to you. The peace you choose becomes the punishment he never expected. Is about the quiet power you gain when you stop engaging in chaos and start honoring your own emotional clarity. It's not about revenge, and it's not about trying to make him feel anything. It's about choosing yourself so completely that your detachment becomes the consequence of his actions. When you were with him, your emotions were involved. You cared deeply, you reacted, you tried to fix things, you explained yourself, you argued when necessary, you fought for the connection. All of that energy created movement, created intensity, created a sense of importance in the relationship, even if the relationship itself wasn't healthy. Every reaction from you reassured him that he still mattered, that he still had a place in your heart, that he still had influence over your emotional state. Even negative attention kept him relevant, because as long as you were emotionally engaged, he could tell himself that you hadn't truly let go. But peace changes everything. When you choose peace, you remove yourself from the emotional battlefield entirely. You stop explaining, you stop defending, you stop reacting to his mixed signals, manipulation, or inconsistency. Your silence and your calmness become the loudest form of truth. They show him that the chaos he once brought into your life no longer has a place there. And that realization hits him deeper than anger ever could. Men expect anger. They expect emotional responses. They expect tears. They expect confrontation. What they never expect, and what they least know how to handle, is indifference rooted in genuine peace. When you stop caring about what he does or doesn't do, when you stop looking for closure, when you stop trying to understand his behavior, when you stop allowing his presence to disturb your mental state, he feels a shift he cannot ignore. Your peace shows him that he no longer has emotional access to you. That's the moment he realizes the door has closed. This peace also mirrors his behavior back to him. Without you to cushion the impact of his actions, he's left face to face with the consequences. When you no longer react to his disappearance, he begins to wonder why. When you no longer respond to his attempts to reach out when it's convenient for him, he starts analyzing what changed. When you stop giving him second chances, he starts to understand that he used them all. Your peace exposes everything he tried to avoid: his inconsistency, his selfishness, his immaturity. And instead of you carrying the weight of those issues, he now carries them alone. Your peace becomes his punishment because it forces him into reflection. It shows him what life looks like without the emotional comfort you used to provide. The stability you brought, the softness you gave, the loyalty you offered. He now feels the absence of all of it. And there is nothing more tormenting than realizing the peace he took for granted was actually coming from you. Not from the relationship, not from him ***, from you ***. Peace is powerful because it also elevates your life. You begin to glow differently, you move with clarity, you make decisions with confidence, you redirect your energy into people and places that value you. Your entire life begins to shift upward, and while he watches from a distance, whether literally or emotionally, he feels the sting of being left behind. He sees that the woman he once underestimated has risen into someone he can't reach anymore. The truth is, you didn't choose peace to hurt him. You chose peace to heal yourself. But the very thing that heals you is often the thing that shows them exactly what they lost. Your peace becomes the reminder he never escapes. You moved on, you leveled up, and you did it without him. And that realization stays with him far longer than your hurt ever did. When someone repeatedly underestimates your value, it's rarely because they can't see your worth. It's usually because they've grown comfortable with the parts of you that benefit them while ignoring the parts that require effort, respect, or emotional responsibility. This is about understanding why people take you for granted, why they overlook the depth of what you bring to their life, and why walking away is sometimes the only language that finally breaks their pattern. It's not about revenge or ego. It's about clarity that shows you exactly where you stand, what you've been tolerating, and how someone's consistent behavior reveals the truth far more clearly than their words ever could. When someone downplays your importance, it often starts subtly. They respond less, they make fewer plans, they stop showing appreciation, or they treat your presence like it's guaranteed. At first, you blame yourself. Maybe you overreacted, maybe you're expecting too much, maybe they're just busy. And because you care, you shrink a little. You accept crumbs. You silence your needs. You hope they'll return to who they were. But when someone gets used to you bending, they stop noticing the strength it takes to do that. They assume your patience is endless, and they mistake your loyalty for a lack of options. What they don't realize is that your silence isn't weakness, it's data, you're observing, you're learning. You're noticing every moment their actions fail to match their words. People don't take you for granted because you aren't valuable. They do it because you're too valuable in ways they're not mature enough to handle. Your consistency exposes their inconsistency. Your emotional availability highlights their avoidance. Your effort reveals their lack of effort. And instead of rising to match your energy, they retreat into behaviors that require less from them, even if those behaviors cost them you. That's the part they don't see until it's too late. Taking someone for granted is easy when that person hasn't yet walked away. They're so used to you being there answering messages, forgiving mistakes, showing up, that they forget your presence is not a default setting. It's a choice, and eventually something shifts. You stop trying, you stop putting in the effort they never matched. You stop initiating, explaining, reminding, hoping. Not loudly or dramatically, quietly. That's the moment they finally feel your value, because the absence of what you brought hits harder than your presence ever did. The truth is, people don't realize how deeply you held them until they feel the emotional vacuum you leave behind. The good mornings that aren't there anymore, the calls you don't make, the emotional support you stop providing. The warmth they took for granted suddenly feels like cold silence. That's when regret begins, not because they lost someone, but because they lost you. Your presence wasn't just comforting, it was anchoring. Your love wasn't just affection, it was stability. And they notice the difference immediately. But here's the part most people never understand. By the time they realize your value, you're not angry anymore. You're done. You've moved from emotional attachment to emotional clarity. You no longer crave what they offered. You see the relationship for what it was, the potential for what it never became, and the effort you gave that wasn't reciprocated. And the moment you step back into your self-worth, they step into their regret, not out of love, but out of the sudden recognition that they mistook rarity for routine. They mistook depth for convenience. They mistook you for someone who would never leave. And the truth is, nothing teaches someone faster than losing the person they thought would always stay. When your words stop landing, when your explanations start feeling repetitive, and when the same conversations lead to the same behavior, your silence becomes the only thing that truly communicates what you've been trying to say. This is about the power of stepping back, not to punish someone, but to reclaim your energy, your emotional bandwidth, and your sense of self. Silence isn't about winning, it isn't about ego, it's about clarity. It's about allowing the other person to finally feel the weight of what they've been ignoring, dismissing, or minimizing for far too long. Silence becomes powerful when you've already tried communicating with honesty and vulnerability. You showed up. You expressed your needs, you voiced your concerns, you gave them chances not because you were weak, but because you believed in the connection. You wanted it to work. You wanted them to understand you, meet you halfway, and value what you were offering. But when someone is not ready to hear you, your words become background noise. They take your warnings lightly because you've always stayed. They overlook your pain because you've always forgiven. They undervalue your presence because you've never actually stepped away from the table. Silence changes that. It removes the comfort they relied on. It removes the predictability they took advantage of. It removes the emotional safety net they assumed would never disappear. When you stop explaining, they start reflecting. When you stop reaching out, they start noticing the void. When you stop giving them access to your heart, they finally feel the consequences of their behavior, not through anger, but through absence. Silence forces someone to confront their own patterns without the distraction of your reassurance. It shows them what life looks like without your emotional labor cushioning their neglect. And for many, that's the moment reality hits. They realized they weren't just losing a person, they were losing their peace, their support system, their emotional grounding. They feel a shift not because you made a dramatic exit, but because you withdrew the connection they depended on without even realizing it. Silence also transforms you. It pulls you out of emotional loops that exhaustion made you tolerate. When you step back, you start seeing the relationship differently. You see the imbalances, the unmet needs, the moments you accepted less than you deserved. You see how much of yourself you poured in, hoping they'd eventually reciprocate. Silence reveals truths words could never reach because it gives you space from the emotional noise. It gives you a chance to feel your own worth again, without their inconsistencies clouding your judgment. It helps you realize that peace isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you protect, and once you've tasted that peace, going back to chaos feels impossible. That's why silence is so powerful. It doesn't just teach them, it teaches you. It shows you what life feels like when you prioritize your emotional well-being. It shows you how strong you are when you stop chasing clarity from someone who can't provide it. It shows you that walking away isn't losing, it's choosing yourself. And that choice changes everything. By the time your silence finally reaches them, you're no longer in the place where their response can sway you. You've evolved beyond the version of you who begged for understanding. You're done trying to be heard by someone who was never listening. Their regret may come, their realization may arrive, their apology may surface, but your silence has already taken you somewhere they can't follow unless they grow, evolve, and rise to meet you. Silence isn't empty. It's full of truth they couldn't hear when you were still speaking. In the end, forgetting him isn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about choosing not to let it define your future. You're not erasing a person, you're reclaiming your power. When you stop carrying what was never yours to hold, you rise into a version of yourself he can never forget. Not because you stayed, begged, or proved anything, but because you walked away with grace, healed with intention, and built a life that speaks louder than any closure he could ever offer.